Welcome everyone. It is 3 p.m. and it's time for the Server Room Show. This is episode 38. Most probably this is gonna be another two-part episode as I put together quite a big and long show notes. The main part of this will be in two parts. The first part I would go through the brief history of Commodore and Amiga, and I would continue with some of Amiga's specialties like Amiga OS and Amiga Unix, and I would mention some stuff about Morph OS and some other OSs influenced by Amiga OS. But first I have a special message to a special friend of mine, my main fun and most adorable listener, who is getting better day by day, quicker and quicker. I hope so. He is recovering from a recent surgery, and I wish him a swift recovery and Alaskan salmon. And this was for Ben the Black Cat. So, now that Ben the Black Cat has been mentioned, which definitely raised my spirits, because I love the cats and the more black they are, the better it is. Because somehow people are very superstitious and always think that black cats mean bad luck, which is absolutely not true. It has nothing to do with the luck at all. Remember that if the cat is crossing the street, it is because the cat is going somewhere. So, brief history of Commodore and Amiga. I mentioned these under the secondary title as the ones that got away, but for the reason that I did have a Commodore C64 when I was growing up. It was one of my first home computer. I had something else before that, but I mentioned that for the love of God I'm not able to figure it out what it was. It was something before, but before the Commodore 64, but I don't know what it was. So the first one I remember was indeed the Commodore C64, but I was never lucky nor fortunate nor rich enough to get an Amiga. And I know people who had Amiga, and they treasure it and keep it up until today. And actually Amigas are still enjoy together with Commodore cult following, and they are quite expensive, and definitely parts for it are quite expensive as well if you want to get one on the second-hand market. So to start this a brief history I brought together with the help of the Wikipedia page on Commodore International. It was founded by Jack Tramiel, a Polish Jewish immigrant in Toronto, Ontario, Canada in 1954. Personally, I always thought that Commodore was an American company, but it must have been just my ignorance that anything which used the language English I associated either with the United Kingdom or with the United States, and Canada and Australia and New Zealand always been left out in my mind when I was thinking where the thing might be from. It started out as a typewriter manufacturer after signing a deal with a Czechoslovakian company to manufacture under their license or their design. By the late 1950s, Japanese machines, typewriters, completely forced North American typewriter companies to cease business, but Tramiel instead turned to adding machines. They are called adding machines because they are not the electronic calculators just yet. They are adding machines of another type, which are not the electronic calculators many would think when it hears adding machines. In 1962, Commodore went public in the New York Stock Exchange under the name Commodore International Limited. In 1960, history again repeats itself when Japanese firms start producing and exporting adding machines. So, as it happened with the typewriter business, so to say, the same is happening again, this time with the adding machines. The company's main investor, Irving Gold, suggested to Tramiel to travel to Japan to learn how to compete with or against the Japanese firms. Instead, Tramiel returned with the new idea to produce electronic calculators, which were just coming out onto the market. By the early 1970s, Commodore had a profitable calculator line and was one of the more popular brands producing both consumer and scientific programmable calculators. In 1975, Texas Instruments, the main supplier of calculator parts, entered the market directly and put out a line of machines priced at less than Commodore's cost for the parts. So 1975, Texas Instruments, who previously didn't bother put the calculators together by themselves, and they were just a supplier of parts, suddenly got the sparkling idea that why they are just a parts supplier when they could use their own parts and build their own calculators under their own brands, as it was a definitely a profitable business of the time. In the beginning of 1976, Commodore, to compete with this, used an infusion of cash from its main investor Irving Gold to purchase several second source chip suppliers. One of them was including MOS Technology Inc. In order to assure his supply or their supply. The condition to this purchase was that its chip designer Chuck Peddle joined Commodore directly as head of engineering. Another interesting fact that through the 1970s, Commodore also produced numerous peripherals and consumer electronic products, such as the Chessmate, a chess computer based around the MOS 6504 chip released in 1978. After Chuck Peddle took over as head of engineering at Commodore, he convinced Tramiel that calculators were already at the end and that they should turn their attention to home computers. Peddle packaged his single-board computer design in a metal case, initially using calculator keys, later using a full QWERTY keyboard, a monochrome monitor and a tape recorder for program and data storage to produce the Commodore PET or PET. Starting from the Commodore's PET 1977 debut, Commodore would be a computer company. In 1980, Commodore launched production for European market in Braunschweig, Germany. I don't know that's how it's pronounced. It's good to note as it's kind of its international expansion, or how to say that they moved some of the production for the European market to overseas, and it's in 1980, so it's not bad. By 1980, Commodore was one of the 3 largest microcomputer companies and the largest in the common market. However, by mid-1981, its US market share was less than 5%, and US computer magazines rarely discussed Commodore products. Byte magazine stated of the business computer market that the lack of marketing strategy by Commodore, as well as its past nonchalant, and I had to get what the synonym is this, and Google told me that it's cool as a cucumber or unconcerned attitude towards the encouragement and the development of good software has hurt its credibility, especially in comparison to the other systems on the market. If you recall, when we had that 3-part episode on the history of BSD, I don't know if I mentioned or not, but one of the reasons why Dr. Marshall Kirk McCusick turned down the offer of Bill Joy to join to Sun Microsystems early on and obtain a single-digit employee number was the reasoning or the thinking behind that. Most of the all the computer brands or systems or however you want to call them, they are as good as the programs and applications developers are willing to write for that platform. So from this statement on based by Byte magazine, you can see that it is important that developers write applications to your platform and to your machines, and it's not something you can take lightly. If you think about an example of today, Apple computers are great and everything as long as they have competitive and all those business important and important software like Adobe or Microsoft Office or other business focused software. The moment they don't have that, and the moment developers are not willing to develop for the platform they use, and now they about to switch to ARM architecture more and more, that can be a deal breaker when it comes to the future success of a platform. So you see that in 1981 Commodore already facing kind of this issue, and mainly because they are not encouraging enough the developers to write software on their platforms. Also, Commodore business machines were widely recognized to be unhelpful, which was stated by the author of the book Programming for the PET-CBM of 1982. However, Commodore managed to re-emphasize the US market with the VIC-20. The PET computer line was used primarily in schools where its all tough metal construction and the ability to share printers and disk drives on a simple local area network were an advantage, but they did not compete well on home setting where graphics and sound were important, and this was addressed by the VIC-20 in 1981. The VIC-20 cost of around the US dollar $299 and were sold in retail stores, and Commodore ran also an aggressive advertisement campaign featuring William Shatner, Captain Kirk, asking consumers why buy just a video game. This strategy worked so well that the VIC-20 became the first computer to ship in more than 1 million units, as a total of 2.5 million units were sold over the machine's lifetime. In another promotion aimed at schools, and also a way of getting rid of unsold inventory, some PET or PET models labeled Teacher's Pet were given away as a part of a buy two get one free or a buy one get one free kind of promotion or deal. In 1982, when I was born, Commodore introduced the Commodore 64 as the successor of the VIC-20. It has possessed remarkable sound and graphics for its time, and often credited for the starting of the computer demo scene. The C64's initial price was US $595, which was compared to the VIC-20 was high, but was still much less expensive than any other 64K computer on the market. In 1983, Tramiel decided to focus on market share and cut the price of the VIC-20 and the C64 dramatically, starting what would be called the home computer war. Other manufacturers such as Texas Instruments, Atari, and every other pretty much except Apple computers responded, and there was an all-out price war. By the end of this conflict, Commodore had shipped somewhere around 22 million C64s, making it the best-selling computer of all times. Commodore boards of directors were as impacted as anyone else by this price spiral, and decided that they wanted out. An internal power struggle resulted in January 1984 that Tramiel resigned due to an intense disagreement with the chairman of the board, and Irving Gould replaced Tramiel with Marshall F. Smith, a steel executive who had no experience in computers or consumer marketing. Tramiel founded a new company, Tramel Technology. He named it to make it easier for people to pronounce it, as sometimes they had problems pronouncing his surname correctly, and hired away a number of Commodore engineers to begin work on a next generation computer design. In February 1984, Commodore purchased a small company called Amiga Corporation for $25 million, which became a subsidiary of Commodore called Commodore Amiga Inc. Commodore brought this new 32-bit computer design, which initially was codenamed Lorraine from 1979 and had been called High Toro from 1980 to 1981, then later dubbed the Amiga under Amiga Inc. in early 1982. There were 3 unsuccessful attempts to release the Amiga by J. Miner and Company in 1982, 1983, and one more after Commodore bought Amiga in 1984, after which it was released only to the local public. Then in 1985, Commodore re-released it to the world. The initial cost was around $1,000 to $1,300 US. It is interesting to see that 3 unsuccessful launch to Amiga, and eventually it does see the day of light and the public can put their hands on it eventually by 1985. Meanwhile, Tramiel had beaten Commodore to the punch. His computer design was 95% complete by June 1984. In July 1984, he bought the consumer side of Atari Inc. from Warner Communications, which allowed him to strike back and release the Atari ST earlier in 1985 for about $800 US. The Atari was technology-wise almost out, however the Amiga was out sooner. So sometimes it's not important who is technologically more advanced, as long as the other one is quicker, so to say. Throughout the life of the Atari ST and Amiga platforms, a ferocious Atari Commodore rivalry raged. While this rivalry was in many ways a holdover from the days when the Commodore 64 had first challenged the Atari 800, among others, in a series of sketching television commercials, the events leading to the launch of the ST and Amiga only served to further alienate fans of each computer, who fought vitriolic holy wars on the question of which platform was superior. It's pretty much the same as of today, when PlayStation and Xbox fans are arguing of which one is better. I always said that get both of them, and no one can be happier than you. I mean, if you can afford both systems, have both, and you can have the best of both worlds, literally speaking. This was reflected in sales numbers for the two platforms until the release of the Amiga 500 in 1987, which led the Amiga sales to exceed the Atari ST by about 1.5 to 1, despite reaching the market later. However, the battle was in vain, as neither platform captured a significant share of the world computer market, and only the Apple Macintosh would survive the industry-wide shift to Microsoft Windows running on PC clones, which is true. There were also horror stories in the industry about Commodores dealing with dealers and customers alike. Having issues with poor treatment was not helped by the fact that sometimes new models were introduced which were incompatible with existing ones. In 1987, the Amiga 2000 is introduced, and Commodore started to favor authorized dealers compared to previous toy stores and discount outlets. Commodore is trying to appear and put the Amiga in a more serious light, so to say, to appear more appealing to business customers, and market the Amiga line as business platform. Software developers also disliked the Commodore platform. You remember I said previously that it's very important, and it can be a real deal breaker that to have developers and to have those key and important softwares available on your platform. Otherwise, I mean, you are just as good as a toaster next door, because a computer or a computer platform on its own, without the proper software, or the not famous, the cool software, so to say, it's not gonna be enough for maintaining the fans and the user base, and to be profitable. You need software just as much. You need the great and good hardware. So software developers also disliked the Commodore platform. At 1987 on Comdex, an informal InfoWord survey found that none of the developers present planned to write for Commodore platforms. This of course did not help Commodore's plans to try and establish Amiga as a business platform, as it was their plan and intention. Commodore faced problems when marketing the Amiga as a serious business computer, as they were still seen as a company making cheap computers like the Commodore 64 and VIC-20. By the late 1980s, the personal computer market had become dominated by the IBM PC and Apple Macintosh platforms. As early as 1986, the mainstream press was predicting Commodore's demise. Commodore failed to update the Amiga to keep pace as the PC platform advanced. PCs fitted with high-color VGA graphics cards and Sound Blaster sound cards had finally caught up with Amiga's performance, and Commodore began to fade from the consumer market. The sentence that the PCs eventually finally caught up with Amiga's performance in the multimedia sense, mentioning graphics and sound. Amiga did have, and I never had an Amiga myself, and by the time I realized I want one, there are hardly enough out there. I mean, there are enough out there, but they are more and more expensive. an Amiga 1200 I can see here and there for like around 400 euros, more or less. And if you want to go all out and get something as fancy as the Amiga 4000, if you find any, that's gonna be 4000 euros or more, without any special add-on cards or bits and pieces. So I could get an Amiga 500 or a 1200. Actually, digging around forums, they recommend that 1200 can be more expandable, and in the long run, as an investment for your money, you can run more things on it, than you can do more things with it, and you can run more things on it than what you could do simply with an Amiga 500. But also on these old systems, for example, they mention a lot on the Amigas that you have to look into reviewing those capacitors on the motherboard and make sure that you have them replaced, so it doesn't blow up in your face. I mean, not in your face, but on the motherboard, and doesn't cause irreversible damage. So what I wanted to say, yes, that I didn't have an Amiga personally, but I know that when they came out, up until the time when the PCs eventually caught up with Amiga, they had a superior performance in sound and graphics, in multimedia applications. They had applications for working with video, and graphic artists use them, people to create music, and then the PCs caught up, and Commodore was not updating the Amiga line to keep the pace as the PC platform advanced, and lost its edge and lead, and eventually it came to the demise of the Amiga platform. Although the Amiga was originally conceived as a gaming machine, Commodore had always emphasized the Amiga's potential for professional applications, but the Amiga's high-performance sound and graphics were irrelevant for most of the day's MS-DOS-based routine business word processing and data processing requirements, and the machine could not successfully compete with PCs in a business market that was rapidly undergoing commodization. Commodore introduced a range of PC-compatible systems designed by its German division, and while the Commodore name was better known in the US than some of its competition, the system's price and specs were only average. In 1992, the A600 replaced the A500. It removed the numeric keypad, zero expansion slot, and other functionality, but added IDE and PCMCA, and a theoretically cost-reduced design. Designed as the Amiga 300, a non-expandable model to sell for less than the Amiga 500, the 600 was forced to become a replacement for the 500 due to the unexpectedly higher cost of manufacture. Productivity developers increasingly moved to PC and Macintosh, while the console wars took over the gaming market. David Pleasance, managing director of Commodore UK, described the A600 as a complete and utter screw-up. In 1992, Commodore released the Amiga 1200 and Amiga 4000 computers, which featured an improved graphics chipset, the AGA. The advent of PC games using 3D graphics such as Doom and Wolfenstein 3D spelled the end of Amiga as a gaming platform due to mismanagement. By 1994, only the operations in Germany and the United Kingdom were still profitable. Commodore declared bankruptcy on April 29, 1994, and ceased to exist. So, exactly with 20 seconds on the clock, I finished. This is how much I wanted to go through the brief history of Commodore and Amiga, and next Saturday we will get into more into the OS and other PCs. Thank you very much.